For centuries, fortune-telling has been a part of our culture in one way or another. People have always wanted to find the answers to questions about their future, and the Ozarks is no exception to this age-old fascination.
Jean Wallace, who lived down near what today is Roaring River State Park in Berry County, she was probably the most famous in all of the Ozarks for this.
Wallace, a native of New York City, didn't move to the Ozarks until the 1890s when she homesteaded a small piece of land in Berry County. She would end up living there for quite a while.
She went back to New York during World War I to work as a nurse. That had been her profession before she came to the Ozarks. But she told people that it was too painful for her working in a hospital because she knew what was going to happen to all of her patients.
Her gift of foresight might have kept her from working in the hospital, but it didn't take long for the locals of Berry County to notice that Wallace was a bit peculiar.
For one thing, it was unusual for a middle-aged woman just to, homestead land there in this rugged part of the Ozarks. But she would take in visitors and try to help them find lost wallets, cows, and the various things that you lose out in the rural Ozarks in those days.
In her later years, Wallace would become somewhat of a local icon to those living in Berry County, and when the government established a civilian conservation corps in the 1930s, the men quickly became accustomed to visiting her.
One guy who stayed in the area after working at that camp told the story of going to talk with her, and he was skeptical about the whole thing, and she told him that he would have a bad car wreck when he was about 50 years old.
The man who was once a skeptic likely changed his mind years later after a car accident that happened when he was right around 50 years old.
He survived the car wreck and was able to tell about, receiving this fortune years earlier, like 30 years earlier, from the Mountain Maid, Jean Wallace.
The Mountain Maid, while wildly popular and loved by those in the area, had plenty of other skeptics who would sometimes be proved wrong, at least in their own mind.
One of the CCC boys who was boasting about how he was going to go up there and prove her a fraud and all this kind of stuff. And he said when he got to the house, all she did was open the door and then slam it in his face, which convinced him that she knew he was a skeptic and had come up there just to mess with her.
Throughout her life, Wallace was known for being camera shy, until just a few weeks before her death, which solidified the belief that some had that she could, in fact, see into the future.
She did finally let a local reporter take several pictures of her in just a few weeks before she died in a house fire in 1940. Almost, and of course, local people interpreted that as she knew her own end was coming and finally, let some outsiders in.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, there's no doubt that the stories of the Mountain Maid of Roaring River have impacted the area. And although her cabin was lost to a fire and her land became a part of the Mark Twain National Forest, tales of Jean Wallace are sure to live on in and around Berry County.
It was, again, a kind of a glimpse into a part of the old Ozarks that doesn't exist as much now as it did in those days, especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s when superstition was a little more a part of everyday life, and you had people who became local celebrities like Jean Wallace.